Sultan, is present in person. We anticipate Dr. Sultan joining us, via Zoom. May I have a motion, to approve the agenda for this evening?
I had one recommendation just to update the agenda, to add an update for the board on our partnership with DSBA on strategic priorities, policy revision, and reviewing and updating norms.
May I have a motion, to revise the agenda to add the DSBA updates, to it?
To amend the minutes to add the GSBA.
Second? Thank you. All right. All in favor of approving the agenda for this evening, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. The agenda for the meeting is approved.
Well, welcome, board members. Good to see you. Hope you've been enjoying this beautiful weather. Hopefully, we will get out of here early enough so that we can get some more enjoyment of the nice weather out there. But we have several topics on the agenda for this evening, and we are going to start off with a presentation from our Teaching and Learning Division. And Ms. Kristen Givens is going to lead us in an overview of our equity initiatives in our Gifted and Talented program.
Good evening. Sorry to begin. Thank you for inviting me and for having me here to talk about some of our equity initiatives that we have had in place and that we have upcoming. I'm going to start with just letting you know where we currently stand and some limitations that we face. As you probably know, underrepresentation in gifted education is a thing nationwide, statewide, and it has been in City Schools of Decatur as well. We've historically been underrepresented in subgroups of Black and African American identifying students, as well as students from socioeconomically disadvantaged households here in Decatur. Over 10 years ago, the district started to respond to this problem of underrepresentation with universal screening and talent development programs. But 4 years ago, we started to make some additional purposeful efforts. We also revised the universal screening process and talent development program, and I will tell you about all of those things in just a moment. Something that many people do not know or do not understand is that we are bound to state criteria for the gifted identification and services. It's a state mandated program and a state regulated program. So we have to use the state's criteria as well as state approved assessments for identification. So if you hear questions or if someone says to you, why are we not identifying more students? We would like to, and we do have some limitations that we are bound to. One way we have responded to that limitation is to create an Amplify program. It is currently K-8. It was formerly just an elementary school, but a few years ago we expanded it to the middle school. It allows for students from underrepresented groups who demonstrate exceptional cognitive ability and/or achievement, but who do not yet meet state gifted criteria, to attend our gifted resource classes and enrichment intervention classes with gifted identified students. In the 6 years prior to COVID, almost 40% of our Amplify students went on to become gifted eligible by state criteria.
What was that number?
Just under 40%. And Amplify also prepares students for success in advanced content classes.
How many kids are in the Amplify program?
I did not bring that number with me, but I can get that for you.
Yeah, so you're good to know 40% means 4 out of 10 or 40 out of 100, right? So just to get a sense of the scope.
Totally understand. And I can get that number for you. I do have some percentages upcoming for overall program numbers, but I did not bring that specific number here tonight.
To get into Amplify, how do they qualify? Is it just teacher referral?
I believe it is on the slide right after this one. It is. So the benefit of it being a local program is that we are able to set our own criteria. So you do have to be a member of a currently underrepresented group. In addition, we grandfathered in our original criteria from many years ago, which was a mental ability score at or above the 96th percentile, which is a state criteria for mental ability. But what we expanded it to include, given that nationwide the gifted population is somewhere around 10%, we wanted to look for the top 10% and underrepresented groups. Because what we know is historically, some standardized tests have been biased against members of underrepresented groups. So instead of using a state number for our local program, we are looking for the top 10%. We also have something that is comparative to the multiple criteria pathway to state eligibility, where we look at the multiple areas. So you're looking at high achievement as well as teacher ratings in multiple areas on the gifted rating scale, which is looking at creativity, motivation, and the other domains that the state considers in criteria.
So all the hands and nowheres. So it can be the first category, and then we have or.
Right, you must be a member of a currently underrepresented group and one. Essentially, if a student shows a very high cognitive ability,
Okay.
that student is going to be served. Or if a student is showing high achievement as well as teacher endorsement across different gifted characteristics,
Okay.
that
So
student
it's
would.
one, and then two can be any of them.
And the intention of that was the fact that the state does have two different pathways to gift identification. One is that old psychometric way through cognitive ability and achievement, and the other is the multiple criteria pathway that looks at other characteristics like motivation and creativity. So we wanted to have similar domains. Now, this is a lot of information. These are end-of-year demographics from the 2 years prior to COVID, as well as the end of the day yesterday. I do want you to note that we typically don't run the demographics until the end of the year because we have evaluations ongoing throughout the year. So we're in the middle of spring evaluations right now. So these March 2022 numbers will likely change by the end of the year, but I wanted you to have something more current than the year before COVID. The reason last year is not reflected is because we didn't have an evaluation cycle during COVID. We also had lots of students coming in and out, transferring in and out, waiving services during COVID, and the numbers were just constantly changing. Further, this data may look slightly different than what you have seen in some other places, some other summaries, because when I run numbers, I always pull College Heights and Fraser out of our overall population, because Gifted and Talented is a K-12 program. So pulling in the College Heights and Fraser numbers kind of skews the data. But as you can see, we were beginning to see some impacts from our equity initiatives prior to COVID. One of the measures of success of a program is how well that demographics mirrors that of the overall population. And where I would really like to point your attention is to our Black population in the K-5 Gifted and Amplify. 2019-20 was 9.78% compared to the overall population of 14.73%, difference of 5 percentage points. So a gap we were still aiming to close, but we were getting much closer. Unfortunately, COVID did knock us back a little bit. All of our equity initiatives were paused last year, and the ones that we were hoping to start last year and this year had to be delayed. But we are back in action with our initiatives this year and are planning on new ones to come next year. So to speak to what's already in place, unlike many school districts, we have an open recommendation policy. That means anyone can recommend a student, even the student themselves. Any child can be recommended for gifted review. It is not based on a teacher, and a teacher does not have to endorse the recommendation, which is a limit in many other places. We do, as I already said, have universal screening and an automatic system referral process. So as you know, all of our students take the MAP in K through 10, and then we have the COGAT, which is a mental ability test in 1st, 3rd, and 6th grade. And the district automatically refers a student for gifted evaluation if they're from an underrepresented group and meet state criteria in either one of those domains. So it does not matter if a teacher or a parent has recommended the student, we automatically refer. Parents still have to consent to the evaluation. We also have additional and alternative assessment measures. For instance, we know that teacher rating scales have a history of bias towards students from underrepresented groups. So in the areas of creativity and motivation, we make sure we offer direct measures. Interview that we established 4 years ago, and the TTCT, which is a direct measure of creativity. This one is one of my passion projects. 2 years before COVID, we piloted it with Westchester and Glenwood, and then the year before COVID, expanded it to all K-2s. We offer whole class critical and creative thinking enrichment for all students. It's to every homeroom. The gifted specialists offer this once a week to all classes. It's a research-based intervention. It increases exposure to critical thinking, creative thinking, and problem solving for all students. We do have a curriculum that we base all of this on. It prepares our students before the big first grade COGAT evaluation. It also highlights students in different ways for the teachers. So for instance, a very creative outside of the box thinker who does not have the opportunity to show that on somewhat standard achievement tasks, gets to show those characteristics in these little windows of opportunity. And it also gives the gifted specialists an opportunity to kind of see everybody. I already spoke to Amplify and that we have expanded it to 8th grade. And now what's still on the way, we are expanding Amplify to the high school next year. We've already started to identify students. What it will look like in the high school is individualized talent development opportunities during the intervention block that they have now.
rolling?
I think a consistency is probably what our goal needs to be. I know that some of them have done coffee chats and things like that, but, consistency across the schools would probably be a next step and goal for us. It's not.
How often are you able to measure the data that you just showed us, showing that, the gap?
The demographics, like I said, I usually run it at the end of the year since we have, both evaluations ongoing throughout the year that make the numbers constantly shift, as well as students moving in and out.
Really kind of an annual
It's an
measure?
annual measure, so like I said, I gave end of day data yesterday, just to have something updated, but it will be different, as of May 31st.
So when will the gap be closed? How many years is it gonna take?
I would love to have an exact answer for that. My hope had originally been, an aspirational goal was 5 years from the start, and then we had our pause and delay. I think it was very promising that most of our initiatives are elementary-based and rolling up with compounding effects. And so the fact that we were at that K-5, 5 percentage point difference was very promising. I don't know nobody knows how long that COVID delay is going to affect any particular thing, but I'm hopeful that we're back on track as of next year.
That number was 3 years, right? It was right at the 3-year mark.
Yes.
We saw that actual number.
Yes.
So if we take.
Oh, that was that was the end of
That was
2
the-
years.
Oh, end of 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we're about to finish another
That's 4,
year
yeah.
after.
So 1 year after COVID.
So what I'd like to, as soon as we can find out, I'd like us to have a date, you know, just make a commitment on, it's gonna be 5 years. Or, you know, and I understand that you may not have all the information to do that right now, but it would be good for us to maybe get an update on this later in the year when we know. And make that kind of a commitment. I think it helps to have a very clear, defined, as to.
I wonder if that will play into our strategic plan and our, district improvement plan and line all of that up.
Mm-hmm.
You know, our priorities and all that good stuff, that will help inform that process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, I think we all recognize resources go with forcing commitments to be made, so.
I think one of the other barriers to, working towards more progress with our gifted program, and correct me if I'm wrong, is having our teachers go through the gifted endorsement program. So we don't currently offer as a district a stipend or any kind of additional supplement for teachers to get additional add-ons like their gifted certification or a reading endorsement or ESOL. So I think as we look at trying to entice teachers to become more differentiated in their practice, I think adding some kind of supplement to their pay for those additional levels of expertise would be very much helping our teachers make that shift in their mindset of, oh, if I get my gifted endorsement, I'll get an extra $100 a month or whatever. So
No,
I
we do
think
offer the endorsement for, so we provide the opportunity for them to take it. But we do not,
There's nothing.
we don't have an incentive
Right.
beyond
Right.
the free course.
Yes.
Dr. Furman, could we get a proposal or something put in front of us as a part of this process, of this budget, as to what that would look like?
Not for this budget, but I think for upcoming years, yeah. I think we're already at a point with this budget that, we've already got enough stuff to kind of play with, that I wouldn't recommend that we have enough time to really analyze. It takes a while to move all that stuff, so I would recommend we look at doing that
And they wouldn't be
for
able to
FY '24.
add those things.
Right. Yeah, so it would be like educating people on the process, what it means to get your gifted endorsement or ESOL endorsement.
You would actually be interested in offering, like,
Yeah, so I think it's definitely something to shoot for, and we could say, hey, we're looking at this, now let's talk about who's interested and who wants to jump on.
how other districts do it.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Very important.
All right, well, I'm gonna invite up, Ms. Faroon and Ms. Lawrence. As you know, Lenita is our Chief Financial Officer. She's gonna present an update on the budget. We've also invited Tiffany Lawrence, our School Nutrition Director. She has pulled lots of information and done a thorough, update on the budget for school nutrition. So she's gonna share some of that information with you. We'll have a discussion on school nutrition. Also, there was a conversation or some questions about changing increasing the, overall tuition rate at a faster, at a higher percentage over 2 years instead of 3. So that is another part of the budget presentation before we get into actual numbers. And if we make any changes in school nutrition and tuition at College Heights, that will, of course, change numbers again for what the budget looks like for the final approval in April. But we did also invite Ms. Garland, the director for College Heights. She was not able to come, but she did send a member of her school advisory team who was very engaged and active in the process of making the recommendation of that 5% for every, over the next 3 years. Andy, right? Yes, Andy's gonna join us for that part of the conversation. He has some documents to share with the board as well. And here to answer any questions that the board may have about how that process went at College Heights. So with that being said, I'm gonna turn it over to the amazing Miss Bruni.
I don't know about that today.
You are.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. At the March board meeting, I advised you all that the Senate was in the process of approving the amended fiscal year 22 budget. The budget has been approved, and today we will review the impact that the state budget has on the current fiscal year 22 general fund budget and next year's proposed changes for the fiscal year 23 general fund. Definitions are included in this presentation. We will look at the school nutrition budget, review ECLC tuition increases, the special revenue budget, and the ESPLOST budget. We will also look at the general fund budget, including the calendar, the impact of the state budget amendments on the fiscal year 22 budget, the fiscal year 23 base budget, state proposed fiscal year 23 budget, and the tentative preliminary budget. As presented at the March board meeting, the school nutrition department anticipates on receiving approximately $2.9 million in revenue, with the largest revenue source being from sales. Anticipated expenditures balance out at $2.9 million also, with the largest expenses being school nutrition program, which is salaries and benefits, and purchase of food at approximately $1.3 million. This slide provides a historical summary of the amount that general fund supplements the school nutrition program. The first column is the fiscal year. The budget is the amount of funds budgeted in general funds for the program. The budget covers salaries for the school nutrition central office staff, benefits for the school nutrition managers, and miscellaneous budgets for communications and software. Also included in the budget is the amount that ECLC and Fraser pay for food services, which I have deducted out of the budget since these are expenses incurred by the ECLC and Fraser programs for contracted services rendered by school nutrition. Additionally, I have deducted on behalf payments from the school nutrition budget. Although on behalf payments are budgeted, this is for state requirements only. On behalf payments are not actually expenses. We are required by the state to book on behalf payments for retirement benefits and receive an annual report from the state at year end identifying the amounts that should be listed as expenditures. This brings the actual supplement from general fund for school nutrition to the column listed under SNP. Under the column balance is the remaining balance at year end. Fiscal year 22 balance reflects the balance as of today. Considering we have 7 more pay periods in this year, this balance listed in fiscal year 22 will be drastically reduced. Fiscal year.
Linda, I'm sorry if I can ask a question, just to make sure I understand. You're saying that is the balance on payments to this, or is that the balance that is left in the school nutrition program?
For general fund, that is the balance. At the end of the year, those are the funds that are remaining. So they go back to the general fund.
Let me make sure I understand. We go back to the general fund. We're putting money from the general fund into the school nutrition fund?
No, so this is all general fund.
Okay.
So they start off with a budget in
Yep.
general fund for school nutrition. Subtract out childcare on behalf, and then this is your actual balance under SNP. At the end of the year, the funds that they do not spend, just like,
So just under budget or over
Oh, over
budget,
budget.
and it's whether it goes to reserve or not reserve, okay, I
Correct.
got you.
correct. So for fiscal year 22, 361,078 is the balance, but again, we have 7 payments remaining, so that amount will decrease.
But just so that we're all clear around the table, our millage rate is set by the budget number in that second column.
Correct, and yeah, under
Okay.
budget.
And basically, the other things the general fund is limited from spending money on, is limited by the amount that we have to put into the budget that's in that column. Yeah, that is going to be. I look at it, sorry. Okay, I got you.
All right, so for fiscal year 20, that was, school nutrition overspent their budget. And so instead of 749,582, the actual school nutrition supplement was 803,442. For 2019, the actual supplement was 784,471.
The 2020 number was almost certainly driven by an unanticipated
Oh, without
impact
a
of
doubt.
COVID hitting, yeah.
Yeah.
So.
So we budget out of the general fund in let's just stop at 2021. That's fully complete normal year. $877,000 out of the general fund to be spent on nutrition.
Yes, but you have to deduct, childcare because those are actually expenses that nutrition charge for ECLC and Frazier. Contracted service, and then again, on behalf payments are requirements from the state, they're not actually expenses.
So that gets us down to 728 out of the fund, that's where that 728 comes from?
Correct.
Okay. And then the actual S&P supplements, what we got from, what is that one?
That's the actual amount after you add back in your balance. So although we budgeted, let's say for fiscal year 21 for 728,414,
Yeah,
at the end of the year, they only used 675,152.
and then how much of that fund came from, define what budget, what the input there is, 2021?
It's all general fund.
It's all general fund. That is not the, federal or the local.
School nutrition, totally different budget. This is how school nutrition, they do not receive enough revenue to be self-supporting.
Okay.
So the district supports them through general.
To the tune of 784, 803, 675, 422, and then a number that while staff, et cetera, has been paid for, sales, it will go down from there until the end of the budget.
And the childcare and on-behalf payments that are coming out of ECLC or Frazier Center, is that a fund transfer from those programs to the general fund, or does it go through SMP?
No, she actually bills them.
So you bill them, and so they just pay directly? That's paid directly to the general fund?
It's paid from the general fund to the school nutrition fund.
No, I'm sorry, the childcare and on-behalf payments is what I'm saying.
So for childcare, Tiffany sends she sends, let's say Frazier an invoice, I guess based on participation, and they will actually send her a check.
And that is paid for from the tuition that the Frazier Center or whatever
Yes, you can
services the
leave, right,
Frazier Center
mhm.
gets. But if we're subsidizing Frazier also,
Right,
the general fund is basically paying the general fund.
yeah, you could subtract that from the 394.
Yeah. Okay, so we are in effect, actually. The 877, 819 is the right number. Yes, we bill Frazier Center, but we actually also subsidize the Frazier Center, so we're effectively putting that money back to.
Right.
Our millage rate is set by the 877. That, again, that second column is what sets our taxes
Correct.
and limits what we can spend the money in the general fund.
Right.
Okay.
Any more questions on that? 14. More detail on school nutrition?
Is there, I would like to request, and this, I realize this is a full group discussion, not just me, so I'm just requesting, but actually actually like to see the expenses associated with school nutrition fund in the school nutrition fund. And if it is short, then we do a interfund transfer from the general fund, so that subsidy is transparently clear. I just think it's a cleaner way from an accounting standpoint, and a booking standpoint to handle it. And that allows us to see this as opposed to, you know what I mean, where this was something that might have flown under the radar.
Like
I
we do
think.
for, ECL.
I'm sorry?
You want us to do for school nutrition like ECLC? So we
Yeah,
have
yeah,
that we
yeah.
transfer.
I mean, I obviously am putting that forward to the group, but it just makes it a lot clearer that the general fund is subsidizing about, you know, closing in on $1 million a year school nutrition.
I think if the board is eager to make sure we have transparency, I think finance has her procedures on how that works. And, as long as we're able to produce the numbers as requested for the public, and you guys can review them monthly at the board meeting when we do the finance report. You know, I think if we want to highlight that and in the transparency piece, we can do that. I just hate to mess with how they already work their finances and procedures in that department.
And it's normal operating procedure. The state actually has a function called school nutrition.
Because that was my question, trying to understand this process. Is that reasonable, or, you know, like, in terms of that information, how you pull that information? I don't know, does that create an additional process for you?
Well, I mean, I would just have to rearrange some numbers, but when you receive your monthly financial report in the general fund, there's a school nutrition line, and you see the school nutrition, so you can see whatever expenses and what the budget is.
So if we raise the cost of food, for example, if we raise the pricing, those dollars are gonna go into the school nutrition fund, which is already balanced. So then the school nutrition fund is gonna again begin to run an overage.
No, I would definitely decrease.
So then you would have to then do an interfund transfer out to the general fund to offset what we're doing here. So, see what I'm saying? Like, in any case, we're gonna be
You
doing.
wouldn't have to do a transfer. I would just decrease the budget.
But I thought you said that this budget was based upon personnel that are sitting in the general fund, that are coded to the general
There's
fund.
some salaries in there and other costs, but whatever she can supplement herself, then I would reduce the budget by that amount. And we can split funds.
Yeah, because that number comes from that original thing where it was like sales were one of the numbers.
Right.
Okay, so, then I guess I misunderstood what this represents. This is not a set of personnel and other line items that sit permanently within the general fund. It is truly a subsidy that you're creating, we're just holding it in the general.
No, there are expenses associated with it. So let's say if Tiffany's salary is paid out of this budget, which it is, and she earns more revenue, then perhaps she can pay 50% of her salary out of her budget based on the amount of revenue that she earns.
So you would move it into her budget?
No, I would reduce this budget by 50.
No, I understand. Okay, so I mean, I think we're actually starting to say the same thing. If her budget goes up to cover it because she's got the funds there, then that's effectively what I was asking for. So that makes sense.
Hello, everybody. So first I wanted to just talk a little bit about the school nutrition program. So, you know, our district services 10 sites, so we have meal programs at all 10 sites. We have over 5,000 students in our district, and only 8.75% of those students qualify for free and reduced lunch, which means that based on their income and parent application, that is how they get those services from us. We feed about 493 students for breakfast each day, and a little bit over 2,800 students for lunch each day. The average daily participation, which means it's the average number of students that receive reimbursable meals served in school nutrition based off kids that come to school every day, is 9.2% for breakfast and 52.9% for lunch. So that's like an overall when we look at what our program is doing. So we can't really pass up COVID when we talk about school nutrition. School year 1920 was really big for us because we abruptly stopped service mid-March. And from mid-March until May, we didn't sell any meals, we didn't earn any revenue. And so because of that, we probably assumed about $500,000 in negative sales. And we still serve students free of charge that needed resources, which weren't many, but we still service those kids in their process. In 2021, we didn't return back to in-person school, but we still were servicing kids, we were delivering meals on the buses and those kind of things. But although we were doing that, we were only feeding about 275 students when school started, if you look at that, compared to what we normally feed in August would be our 2,800 kids. So that shows you the massive difference. And then throughout the year, it increased, but we never got to a normal level of participation. Meals were at no cost, not at the beginning of last school year. When we started last school year, initially they started where they still had to fill out an application, and then mid-September-ish or so, that's when they said we can switch to no cost. So we did have parents that were paying for meals at the beginning, which also affects like participation and so forth. But when we went no cost, we increased participation, and that continued from then until now. So when we get to this school year, we're continuing to do no cost, but that changed where our revenue, majority of our revenue comes from, because now our revenue, as opposed to being our paid kids and a la carte sales and other things that we earn revenue through, we're mostly getting our revenue from percent of our kids are bringing in federal revenue. That's what we look like now. That has, I think, increased participation because now everybody knows everything is no cost. And then that matters because of last week, we had a meeting where they are not anticipating extending the no cost. And if they don't do that, then that may decrease participation because now we're gonna have to start paying like in the past. And so that all kind of plays a part. And it may change, but as of now, that's what. So some challenges with the school nutrition program are our smaller schools, they do not produce enough revenue or participation to really support a full nutrition set. So what we've done in the meantime is we supplement that with, we have the larger schools, which is Renfro and Decatur. They actually send in food daily to kind of offset the lack of labor in those buildings. So that's how we service all our schools every day. Estimated loss, if we close for a day, all of the schools, we lose about $11,000 every day we're closed. That's not just a COVID consideration, that's a bad weather. It even matters if a principal emails me and says, Tiffany, I want to take all of 5th grade on a field trip. So if all of 5th grade doesn't eat, that's all revenue that we don't earn. Food shortages. So it's just like what you see when you go into the grocery store. Something that's really affecting us is that we are not getting the food that we planned or that we're used to. So we could say, I'm going to serve a hot dog, a chicken sandwich, and I don't know, chicken Alfredo, that's our menu. And then when we get the truck or we get to the order board, it says we don't have any of those things. An example was we went about 2 months without PB&J, and I don't know if you know, but in PSC, PB&J is like serious. I served lunch and a student was like, you promised PB&J would be back today. And I was like, I am so sorry. And it was at Tally, and I felt so bad, and I had put on the menu what week it would come back, but she was like Monday, and I was thinking Wednesday, so now I don't say that anymore. So we're experiencing that. We also experience price increases for supplies, food, everything. Our paper plates have changed because we can't get that. What manufacturers are doing is they are producing the most popular things. So they have streamlined what they do, and so where they used to do like 5 different trays, they're saying my top 2 trays, this is what I'm doing. And so that matters when we talk about food shortages and so forth. Another thing for us is, I don't want to say it's necessarily a challenge, but it's always something to think about, is that our demographic, they do want a higher quality product, they want more scratch-based cooking, and that matters because not only does it cost more, but you also need more labor to produce it. You can't just count it out and put it out.
I want to expand on that, is that increased labor cost for that premium product, because in most school districts around the metro area and across the state, you get a truck of frozen meals. You pop it in the oven, you put it out there, and you even cook it in its package. then you put it out. So it's very easy to cook the food, put it out, and move on your day. It's very streamlined. So the fact that they're cooking the ground beef, they are cooking the chicken, they are cooking everything from scratch, takes a lot of increased labor.
Which will be why I make the argument that we shouldn't be comparing ourselves to other systems when we talk about price. That we really should price in a way that reflects what our customers are asking.
So the last thing is to talk about general fund, and so Lenita kind of broke down that, so we don't have to go into deep detail about that, but just, that's a challenge. Because the ideal situation for any food nutrition program is to be, so that does require making enough revenue to cover it. So that's a challenge across the nation, it's not a just CSC. So some of the things that we talked about, like increasing revenue, is meal price increases. I'm gonna go into detail about that a little bit later. So each year we end up with bad debt. And so what happens is, one of the things that was on the board agenda a couple months ago was, starting up a charge policy of how we handle when a student doesn't have funds when they come through a certain line. And so in the charge policy, we talk about how we're going to cover that, but then we have to say, how are we gonna cover that? So that is a challenge too, because we aren't allowed to carry bad debt in food nutrition, but we also have to figure out where does that money come from to cover that, whether it's fundraising, whether it's general fund, whatever that looks like. Nutrition Central Office, one of the things that we have to work on is creating innovative menu ideas, creating a premium menu pricing plan, and so those are some of the things that we are considering in our department to see how can we increase the revenue. Also at the school level, focusing on production planning, increased training, maintaining and monitoring inventory levels, improving meal presentation, and supporting our current farm to school efforts that we already have. So first, I'm going to talk about what everybody else is doing price-wise. It is similar but different. So breakfast is $1.25 for us in our district for elementary, $1.65 for middle and high school, and then for lunch, we are $2.75 for elementary and $3 for middle and high school. So I pulled some districts just around for different reasons. Marietta, because people think of us, they think of them. Oconee, because their free and reduced rate is really low, like us, and then Beaufort City, and then the four big ones around. Notice that our pricing is already a little bit higher. The only person who's going to come close to us is Cobb County, and she's currently in the process of presenting to her board, this is where she wants to go with the meal price. But then they're still not at, like, for instance, how we're adults at $4, like, we're still a little bit higher. The USDA did not require us to change prices because of COVID. They had some waivers out there. The ultimate goal is for us to get to a place where we get to that $3.73. They want our our cost of meals to mirror whatever the reimbursement rate. But something that you have to keep in mind is that the reimbursement rate moves every year. So even if we go up in price, we still may never catch them because depending on what's going on in the world, they're changing it, and they change it every July 1. So what I did is I pulled plate costs, and then we also know that we have the reimbursement rate, and those are the things that you want to consider is, one, we want to be at the $3.73, right, for lunch. And then for breakfast, the plate cost $1.94, and for lunch, $4.40. What that is it costs that much to serve it to the kids. That's food, labor, and then there's a gap of things that you don't think about, like paper goods, chemicals to clean the kitchen, repairs. That's that other little bit, percentage or whatever. It's normally under 10%. And so we want to be somewhere in that wheelhouse as far as what we want to be pricing. So we decided to do 50 cents. The last time we increased prices were 17, 18, and that's where we are now. And that was a 25-cent increase across the board. At 50 cents, these are the prices that you'll see over the next 3 years. And the reason that we suggest 3 years is because you still have to remember your community is looking at how much you are increasing prices. Like if you go and say, I'm throwing $1 out there, it sounds very different than another district doing 25 cents or 10 cents, you know, like those. So you kind of think of those things too. So for the 3 years, this is the revenue increase if we were to go with 50 cents. And so for next year, we would increase revenue by 226,000. Next year, which is 23-24, we would increase by 222,000, and 24-25 would be 229,000. Now that's based off me looking at what our traditional participation is, how many kids are free, how many kids are reduced and paid, because we get different amounts of money based off of that child.
Can I just ask outright, what is the dollar amount in this year that we would have had to, what would the meal price for breakfast and lunch be now if we were to break even that $900,000 subsidy?
I would have to go back and calculate that number.
But it's probably more than even 3 years of 50 cents, more than $1.50, right? It's probably more like $2 if my math is right.
I would.
Need to go up.
Well, if it's 900 and we're looking at this right here, you're talking about a little under 700 of an increase. So
Now, remember, this is not all our revenue. So,
Sure.
like you just saw College Heights, because when we provide services, we do charge, and not just the College Heights, to, parts of like, the Housing Authority, there are certain organizations who actually pay us for services. And this is also not counting adult meals, so you have adults that actually normally eat with us on a regular basis. And so we do earn, and then this also does not count à la carte. And so in the high school and the middle school in particular, they are eating like, it's actually our most popular thing at the high school. So they buy those in addition to. The year that COVID began and the year did not complete, we made $200,000 in à la carte alone. And so the goal is to make à la carte the place where you earn that extra revenue.
Ask you, do you talk to the directors of other,
Yes.
districts? And so would it be difficult to find out, like, I was interested in, say, maybe Buford and Oconee, like, how do they do just the heat up, or do they do the meals from scratch?
I can talk to them and get like more details.
Mhm.
We're all very different. It just depends on how they're staffing their labor. Because if they have less people, typically that's more scratch-based. Not any more people, that's more scratch-based, and if they don't, it's the opposite. It just depends on how they're running the show. So I would definitely have to ask. Now, I talked to Oconee, but just about pricing, she's brand new, so I don't know if she has a good, you know, of what's really going on right now. But I can call Beaver City.
And then,
Go ahead, no, go ahead.
and so like the premium meal pricing, and I know we're not making any decisions today, you know, I can see how that could help, but then I'm a little concerned, it feels like there could be the potential for some inequity there in terms of certain folks would be eating
So,
premium.
so the plan with the premium meal pricing, because they do something like this in Fulton County, is for the kids who qualify for free and reduced, they would still be able to get it at the regular price.
Sorry, I had a big question.
Why don't, she's got 2 more slides, and let's finish that, and that may answer some of your questions, and then, open up for more questions and discussion.
So these are some of the menu ideas that my team and I sat down and come up with. So one of the things that we're not doing is we're not selling, we started this year fairly, but we're barely selling anything à la carte in our elementary schools. So some of the things that we're looking at is how to serve some à la carte options to our lower level students. And some of the options that we're looking at, because we're also trying to be parent friendly also, is fruit cups, because we get plenty of fresh produce, smoothies, parfaits, a veggie hummus cup, and currently we actually offer Cookie Fridays in some of our schools. It just depends on the elementary school that you're in. And so that's an untapped revenue source. In middle school and high school is where we plan to roll out the premium entrees. And so, and it's not, you know, the things the kids want to see. So an example would be chicken wings, because believe it or not, chicken wings are super expensive. That's why you don't see them in school. Yes, and so one of the things that COVID, that we were planning to roll out this year was iced coffee in the high school. We actually taste tested it with the employees last spring, but with COVID, I felt like that was too much, because it is more labor intensive, because we have to have machines and so forth. And so I thought it was too much to put on our staff this school year. So we are.
I remember my question, it was a quick question about inflation. Is this, so we're seeing closing in on about 8% a year inflation right now, this budget, and incorporated, presuming that you've already talked about how plates and plastic and all that stuff. We can assume closing in at a 10% increase on all of those supplies over the course of.
So I did assume 5%. Did not assume 10. But yes, I did take into it. So we're not gonna talk about revenue sources, but it's also about not just increasing revenue, but managing costs. So one of the things that we're focusing on is training our managers and staff on ordering and inventory management, because inventory is really money on your shelves. So the better they manage the inventory, the lower plate costs we're gonna have. Also training our staff on standardized recipes and culinary skills, and that matters because first, everything should taste the same, whether you go to Westchester, Cater, but also how many onions, bell peppers, and how much barbecue sauce they stir in the baked beans. That matters because that makes that item cost more. And so the culinary skills, even teaching them how to do that, how to measure properly, how to cut an onion where you have limited waste. Those are all the things that are gonna save costs on the back end. And then USDA. So currently we use USDA commodities to make sure that we are serving fresh produce, which also lowers plate costs. But we also are going to use more of our USDA allotment to put other things on the plate. An example would be beans, because a vegetable or fruit runs about 30-something cents. And so if you can make that USDA, consider that like free food. And so we want to do more of that. It's like when you go to the grocery store, if you get $2 in USDA and you have a $5 bill, and you add them together, you can buy the $7 pack of chicken, but you only pay $5. And so that's what we want to do more of with USDA commodities. And so then labor cost reductions, that is staffing based on how many kids we actually serve. So we did transition this year a little bit more of that. And so what I do is I periodically look at their participation and I say, okay, you're serving 500 kids, I have a formula based on industry standards, and then I say, okay, this is how many staff you should have. Not necessarily what you're used to, but this is what you should have. But part of that is also training, because now you have to train your staff, and what does that look like, and why am I saying that? Tiffany, that's not realistic, but let me show you how, right? And then training managers on how to manage the people's time management, production schedules to make sure that everybody's using their time wisely. And then also piloting a program where a lot of my employees have been here 20, 30 years. So now I'm starting to lose people for realistic reasons. And so now having some of those workers transition to more of a sub worker to kind of balance out some of the labor. So these are some of the things that we're working on in our department.
Tiffany was a teacher also at Dickinson.
Oh, yeah. Oh, way back.
And I have to say, she's doing a phenomenal job. We had to do our, Georgia Department of Education audit for school nutrition. The previous time we did it, how many findings were in it?
33.
And we had, what,
Like 4.
4. So she has done a really great job reviving and, really pulling in some of the industry standards to make sure that we're doing a great job in school nutrition. So she's been doing a great job.
Yeah.
So for the board to discuss, and I don't know if we want to talk about it now or wait till the end, if we want to get through College Heights and then talk about it overall at the end, once we see where all the numbers are on the budget, about some opportunities to increase revenue. Okay, all right. Okay, so, let's move on to college, early learning tuition.
All right, thank you, Tiffany. Next on the agenda is ECLC proposed tuition increase. ECLC Director and Advisory Council and Dr. Furman, met extensively and agreed on a 5% increase over a 3-year period. I have also included in here for additional conversation or discussion is a 7.5% increase over a 2-year period. We presently supplement, for this year's budget, ECLC by $394,400.
I think one of the things to talk about, and I'm glad Andy's here to kind of share with you what the process was to go through to figure out the 5% increase over 3 years. So
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you all for having me here. My name is Andy Navratil. I'm a parent of a 10-month-old infant at College Heights. My wife and I, it's our first child. He's very, very happy at College Heights, and I'm happy to be part of the advisory council and improve the school. So I'll just kind of share with you how this came about in our council, and then also share, if I could, some sort of parent thoughts on the tuition increases. So back in September, at I think it's our second meeting, the principal shared with us that we had unfortunately lost funding through the Head Start grant, which, as I'm sure all of you know, provides funding for lower-income students to get early childhood education. And one of the things that she tasked the council with this year was thinking about how could we replace some of that funding to fund some effectively early childhood spots at the school without the grant.
And I'll just share too, one of the agreements that we've had with Decatur Housing Authority is that we provide cost-free childcare starting as early as they're ready to join our program. So that has been something that was initiated many years ago, got paused somewhere along the way. When I came on board as superintendent, Doug and I kind of revitalized that and then charged Sarah and Jenna with looking at that and then taking it to the advisory council of what does that look like in our budget to make sure that we are providing cost-free childcare for any student in any child in DHA that wants it.
So at our October meeting, we started this process of brainstorming some solutions. We kind of landed on a tentative goal of trying to fund 9 spots. And we came up with a whole list of potential ways to do that, including a modest tuition increase, applying for additional grant funding, partnering with an established local fundraiser like something through Decatur Education Foundation or the Decatur Business Authority, creating a new PTO fundraiser, asking the city commission to sort of student or two at College Heights, asking Decatur Education Foundation for just more funding in general, and creating an opt-in fundraising campaign for parents and alumni of the school to sponsor spots for students. So before we met the next time in December, we sent out a survey to the council. We narrowed those options down to 3 that we were most interested in pursuing. The first one was increasing the ratio in our preschool classrooms from one teacher to 9 students to 1 teacher to 10 students. And the principal reported that teachers were quite supportive of that, and that would create 3 additional spots at no cost. We also agreed to pursue a modest one-time tuition increase to create some spots, and then to pursue this opt-in donation campaign. Then we spent some time brainstorming how to make that opt-in campaign and tuition increase successful. And the council really agreed that we should be transparent about why we're doing this. We should provide parents more information about how College Heights and Fraser are, although they're separate buildings, there really is one sort of early childhood family in the district that we're trying to bring together, and then highlight the need for these tuition-free spots. And in particular, there was a lot of discussion in the council about sort of aligning with the original purpose of College Heights, which I was not here back in, I think, 2005 when it was founded. I'm not sure if you all lived in Decatur at that point, but my understanding from what I've read is that the superintendent and the school board were very concerned about closing the achievement gap and really believe that focusing on early childhood and providing an excellent education at affordable price for everyone in Decatur was a key lever to doing that. So the council really felt like, whatever we do, we need to make sure that we are sort of selling this to parents and with that message in mind, right? That the purpose of raising this money is to help close the achievement gap and fund these spots for students who couldn't otherwise afford. So that's kind of where the council was in early December. And then things, I guess, sort of shifted a little bit in mid-December. So in mid-December, Sarah met with administration, I don't know exactly who, some of you all at this table, I imagine, and sort of came back to us and said, these ideas are great, the administration supports them, they're on board with doing the opt-in campaign, but think that should sort of be farmed out to Decatur Education Foundation. Said we definitely support the increased ratio of 1 to 10, great idea. And so we also support the, tuition increase, but sort of pushed us to go higher. So we had proposed something in the ballpark of, I think, about 2 or 3%. I think I don't remember the exact number, but I think it was something like, $1,400 or $1,450 per month for infants and ones. So it was a very small, modest increase. It was certainly not, 10% that we were sort of pushed to think about. And also it was shared with us that a little bit of the rationale for closing the funding gap and maybe shifted or added to, right? We had sort of come in and said, this is about providing these tuition-free spots. And we were sort of pushed to say, yes, and College Heights needs to do more to close the gap between what it costs to operate and what tuition brings in. And I will say, very frankly to all of you, that there was a very strong negative reaction on the advisory council to that proposal. In particular, I went back before this meeting and looked at the email chain of comments. One thing was sort of like, wow, sticker shock, right? To tell parents, hey, this is going up 5 or 10% in a year is going to be a lot, especially during COVID with the economic impacts of that people are coming off of. There was also a lot of concern about the shifting or the added reasons. When we started this, as a council, we came in saying we want to provide more tuition-free spots. We want to provide 9. And now the rationale seemed to be shifting towards closing a funding gap, which folks felt, pretty strongly that was not why we were doing this. And we kind of felt like 5% was the maximum increase that we. So then we came back in January, and in January, Sarah reported that although Dr. Furman had asked for more money, kind of agreed that a 3-year gradual increase would be acceptable. And the council, they could use the word agreed to, but we sort of acquiesced to the idea of 5% over a year over the next 3 years. We didn't like it, but sort of acknowledged, this is ultimately not our decision as the advisory council. We're giving advice to the superintendent and the school board, and so if that's where we're being pushed. And the council also sort of strongly advised to tell parents the 2 reasons for doing this, that it wasn't just about these tuition-free spots anymore, it was also about closing the funding gap, because we felt that transparency was important. And in mid-January, an email was shared with College Heights families, and there was fortunately, no negative parent reaction to that, which we were happy to see that was the case, because we were a little worried about that with 5%, to be honest. We also, at our February meeting, kind of confirmed that this would fund 3 tuition-free spots at College Heights. We ideally wanted 9, and it would also fund 6 spots at the Fraser Center for next year, I believe. And sort of the reason that I was asked to come here by Sarah and the council is because we understood that there was some talk or suggestion or proposal to increase by, I think it was 7.5%, right, it's on the slide, 7.5% as opposed to 5% per year for the next 2 or 3 years. And that, you all wanted to hear kind of what our process was and to get a parent voice on that. I guess one more thing I should say about the process is we looked at back in when we started thinking about, all right, a modest tuition increase is something we wanted. we looked at what is the monthly tuition that's charged by roughly comparable early childhood learning centers, places that provide an excellent education, places where Decatur parents might go if they didn't go to College Heights. And I think it's a mix of private and public places. And I have one of the handouts I'll pass around to you now. It's the last one, actually shows you our list of comparable schools that we looked at and compared to. And our assessments, I meant to staple them, but, you know, I got home and Jen wanted to eat and have some help going to bed, so I apologize. It's not as organized as I wanted. And these are our, I guess just to explain this a bit, these rates are monthly. So these numbers are obviously annual numbers up here. And so, you know, essentially bottom line is we looked at this list as an advisory council and we said, hey, if our tuition goes up to just under $1,500 a month, for example, for the infant rate, that seems okay and reasonable and in the ballpark. Recognizing that tuition had not gone up for, I think, 5 years or 7 years. Is that right, Dr. Furman, in advance of this or previous to this? And so, you know, that's kind of what, that was our process as a council, I guess, and kind of where we landed. And I think the point I would stress to all of you from, you know, the parents on the council is this started for us as how do we replace lost early Head Start grants, right, to fund tuition-free spots. And, you know, I think we had hoped that sort of all the way through that's what it would be about. And it was, you know, disappointing, maybe is the word to use, that part of it is, you know, sort of shifted to become about closing the budget gap. And we certainly understand, and I guess now I'll sort of speak of me as a parent. You know, I think budgets are about priorities, right? And I think I can speak for the other parents on the advisory council when I say this, is that like all of us feel very strongly that we should be very rooted in our mission of closing the achievement gap. And that starts in early childhood. And I printed off, you know, a couple of the slides that are here. You all are probably like, yes, we've seen these. These are from the last version of the budget presentation, right? Because, I mean, budgets are really about priorities at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. And if, you know, our first strategic priority is paying the educational debt to historically marginalized students, and if we have performance objectives around increasing student achievement and paying that debt, and now I'm speaking as me, although I think folks on the council would agree, we haven't discussed this part, I think there's no better place to do that than in early childhood, right? And frankly, that's not just my opinion. I mean, I'm not an early childhood educator, but I was a teacher. I helped train teachers before I changed careers. And there's a ton of research out there in the United States from the Council of Economic Advisors, from University of Pennsylvania. There's research from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development that says if you invest in early childhood, the return on investment is between 4 and 16%. And some of that comes to society, right, reduced crime. Some of it comes to the child, better income opportunities in life, and some of it comes to the school, right? The school system, competing grades in the future. Less money needed for special education services. You know, fewer students with sort of undiagnosed and unidentified emotional behavior disabilities that require extra funding later when they've been addressed earlier. And so I think that putting a premium on funding early childhood is exceptionally important. And the economist, Dr. Hartman, he created a graph, which I printed for you. And I apologize, the scale is off. If you look at the shows more curves, and essentially what he found in his research is that the earlier money is invested in kids, starting with prenatal and going to early childhood and preschool, the higher its impact, the higher its return on investment, right? And so you know, I'm not naive. I understand this is taxpayer funded, right? I understand budgets have to be balanced, revenues have to be raised. And I would encourage the board to not think of College Heights in the same way that you would think of a for-profit preschool where parents pay tuition, or even a nonprofit, honestly, where parents pay, right? Think of it as an investment in the rest of the city schools. And I think, you know, that trying to move towards a world where College Heights is more or completely self-funding is not in alignment with what we're trying to do to pay the educational debt and close the achievement gap. Because there are families in the city who are not as economically fortunate as my wife and I are. If tuition went up this much or more, it would be a stretch, but we could afford it. And we would afford it, and we would pay it, right? But there are families for whom increasing tuition that much is not an easy thing. And if you want to raise tuition to fund 9 or 20 or 30 tuition-free spots at College Heights, like, by all means, let's do it, right? I think the council would say, all right, we think that's a little aggressive, but we're going to be on board because we want to replace that Head Start money. But increasing tuition at College Heights to close the gap between what tuition brings in and what it costs to operate, I think that's a mistaken way to think about it, and honestly not in alignment with sort of the priorities and objectives is moving forward. So that's my 2 cents as a parent, in context from the advisory council, that hopefully it's helpful.
Can I pick up off of that, actually?
So do we want to, any questions for Andy and what the committee did? Or, because I think for us, like, let's look at then where we end with the budget for recommendations, because any changes we make to revenue or decreases in expenditures, we'll put those into the budget worksheet and present the final budget. So before we decide on, hey, let's do X, Y, and Z with college tuition or school nutrition, I think we need to look at the whole budget overall to make a very informed decision about why we would need to increase revenue versus and or decrease expenditures and or a combination of both.
I think that should be framed from the perspective of what the values are, right? And I think that, I mean, I appreciate the framing that you provided us, because I think that is, I mean, the budget is a value document. That is exactly precisely what it is, right? So I just want to make sure that we engage on that particular point, because from my perspective, we actually are not able to serve, we're only able to serve 3 additional spots because we are undercharging the affluent people that are using the program at a rate that is on $2,000, $2,500 or so per student per year, below what the rest of the market rate is that you provided. And so I'm 100% open to having a conversation about maintaining the same subsidy to the program, as long as 100% of that subsidy goes directly to 8 kids or 12 kids or however many additional kids. What I'm uncomfortable with is subsidizing affluent families going to that program, which is in fact exactly what we're doing right now.
Exactly, because that doesn't come close to funding either the Head Start shortfall or the budget shortfall from ECLC, which is my question, correct? So when you go back to the original promise of this program exists so that we have made a commitment to a housing authority, we've made a commitment to the kids that chart, which is fantastic, that all kids should have access to early childhood learning, because it's not available to everyone. 110,000 is not close to what is currently sent to that program to subsidize what is sent. And so replacing Head Start and filling a funding gap, those are just kind of saying the same thing in different ways, which is just so that we can continue.
I mean, if I may, as this is just me, the council do not talk about this idea, and I think, you know, I've sort of relayed to you the hesitation with a sticker shock of more than a 5% increase, which, you know, that is what we discussed, and that is what people felt. Personally, as a parent, I would encourage the board to consider sort of sliding scale tuition across the board, right? Because I think there's more than two buckets, right? There's more than people with a ton of resources who would go to, you know, I don't know, Primrose in a heartbeat, right? Or somewhere even more expensive. And folks who fall below the free threshold for free and reduced price lunch. I think there's a big spectrum in the middle. And I think there are a number of parents, myself included, who would be very supportive of a sliding scale tuition that felt fair based on family resources and ability to pay.
I was thinking about that too, that we're, you know.
Yeah, I mean, that addresses the concern.
Questions for Andy before we get through the rest of the budget?
Thank you for this chart, particularly doing that work,
Sure.
it's often difficult to find.
Thank you for the presentation, it was very informative.
You're welcome. Hopefully it was helpful.
It's very good.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. Hey, Ms. Broom, you ready to take us through the rest of the budget, and then we'll kind of discuss what are some options?
Next, we have the special revenue budget. Budget consists of state and federal reimbursable grants. There's not much flexibility in grant budget since it is, provided to us with specified purposes. Fiscal year 23, the anticipated revenues and expenditures are balanced at 2.6. Next, the capital budget. Capital budget was presented last month and consists of funds received from each spot, which is a 1 cent sales tax from all DeKalb County purchases. The district anticipates on spending $6.3 million of East Lot funds for fiscal year 23. General fund. I think we will all agree that we have had some very good detailed discussions on the budget. We have met monthly and sometimes twice a month since November 2021. Today, we will review the tentative preliminary fiscal year 23 budget, and the board is scheduled to vote on a tentative budget at next month, April 4th. The Senate passed the fiscal year 2022 budget amendment, and the governor signed off on the budget. The final state amended fiscal year 2022 budget changed from what was originally proposed by the governor. The state will fund 2,000 supplements for 694 of the district employees at a cost of $1.388 million for salaries and $20,129 for benefits. That's the state cost, so they would give us those funds. The board voted for all employees to receive the 2,000 supplement, which means 191 employees will receive the supplement funded out of general fund for $381,800 in salaries, $116,524 in benefits. Austerity will be fully restored at $1.3 million for fiscal year 22. Our local 5 mil share will increase more than I originally projected. The fiscal increase is estimated to be $419,924. This slide shows the fiscal year 22 current budget and the fiscal year 22 amended budget after implementing the state changes discussed on the previous slide. Ending fund balance for fiscal year 22 is projected to be 7.75%.
Ask a question about the 5 mil projection and being off. You weren't off by 419, you were just off a little bit, correct?
Yes. 419 is the new amount, I think it's like 317, something like that.
So, and the reason that would be off is just because the tax revenue was higher than anticipated?
Yeah, you know, you kind of just projecting with the preliminary in the
A
beginning.
whole bunch of numbers, but that's,
Okay. You're off at 0.5%. Pretty good estimate.
thank you.
This slide shows the fiscal year 22 current budget and the fiscal year 22 amended budget after implementing the state changes discussed on the previous slide. Ending fund balance for fiscal year 22 is projected to be 7.75.
You gotta go back 2 slides.
Okay, so again, you see the state amended fiscal year 22 budget with a 7.75% ending fund balance. Anticipated changes to the fiscal year 23 budget include projected 8% growth in the tax digest, reduction of tuition by $17,000 due to graduating seniors, $331,592 increase for local category grants from the state, $17,355 increase for state grants. Salary, benefits, and increases in professional services are all from CARES reallocation to general fund. Ending fund balance for fiscal year 23 base budget is 2.67%.
Wait, it looks like their austerity is back for the 23 budget?
Well, I haven't went into the fiscal year 23 state change,
Oh, okay, I'll stop.
so you'll hear.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, here we go. Fiscal year 23 proposed state amendments include a $997,867 adjustment to local share. $419,924 was included in the fiscal year 22 budget. Increase in QBE of $888,607 for training and experience. Decrease of $775,48 for a decrease in enrollment. Fully restoring the austerity of $1.3 million. Increase of $2,000 to teacher salary schedule, which equates to $933,702. And new to it is all earned school nurses receive a 5.4% salary increase. State will provide $5,717, and if we give this increase to all of our nurses, the general fund will fund $44,716. This slide shows the fiscal year 23 base budget with the state amendments, and also included is the step increase for eligible employees. The new ending fund balance is 3.06%. Per board policy, the budget must be passed with a minimum fund balance of 4%, so it was necessary to reduce the budget. Unfortunately, the reductions are not as much as what was presented at the March board meeting. Reductions decreased due to an increase in the local fair share, increases for nurses' salaries and benefits, and a discrepancy in the financial system with a budget from previous years was not carried, but mysteriously appeared for fiscal year 23. You know, I have been a real
At least you caught it.
It was what?
You caught it.
What was a glitch in the system when I put all the numbers in I anticipated, so I called the vendor, and they couldn't explain it. So I do have a meeting with them tomorrow. I almost cried over this. So this is your fiscal year 23-25 budget. We don't look as good as we thought we would, but we still look a lot better than we initially projected. Any questions before I go over the function?
Enrollment still going down or staying flat?
It's, up top, under revenue, you see the 77548 in red, the decreased enrollment,
Yep.
and then you see it.
So, that you're saying that the glitch is why it's 6.87 on this slide and it's 7.58 on the other, or is that supposed to match?
It's included in the revision, if you all recall, initially the reduction was like 3.8, so there's 3 point. Now, your ending fund balance, tentatively for fiscal years 25 is 8.73, which, still put us in the green, but not as.
So one slide previous, Lenita. Here was that our preliminary budget, down the bottom, 7.58, and now go back to the next slide, and then it's 6.8.
That's what I was mentioning here, that's what I was
Okay.
confused by.
The 6.8, this is the correct.
So okay.
Did not get this right today.
That's because
Benefits are it's benefits differences
Yes,
between the two.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And benefits, if you look on the next slide for, by functions, you see that 23%, a big part of it is school nutrition. This is yours by function.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Just want to dwell on it for half a second because, it's precisely what I was hoping to see, where a lot of that red reductions are happening outside of instructional and all of that, right? And so that, I encourage you to talk about that, right?
Yes.
The parents understand that we're actually increasing what we spend on instruction by 5%, and we're finding the cuts, we're actually cutting fairly hard in a number of operational and overhead buckets. That's,
That's definitely an increase in, of 5% in instruction. And, maintenance and operations, that's 7% increase. I mean, decrease.
decrease, yes. Yeah. So anything we're talking about here, does this 6.87 include, it includes the, projected ECLC tuition, but it does not include the projected, nutrition, school nutrition?
It includes the 5%
School nutrition.
ECLC.
Oh, it includes ECLC, it includes tuition, it does not include nutrition.
That's correct.
That's about student transportation, that's already, but what's the cut there?
Operational costs. Operational.
We were able to move some of their,
Software.
software to SPLOST.
If you look at that line,
So they're still providing their level of service.
that line is also just plus 76. All over the place.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And we moved a lot of, like you said, software, we did, so lots of moves are included in
Hey, debt service is a compliment to the finance office,
Mm-hmm.
by the way.
It is.
Well, the city, taxpayers of Decatur owe you personally a $25,000 compliment.
You guys can't go into this budget.
That's gonna give me a break.
Well, we refinanced the bond and,
Yeah.
gone down since we did it, and congrats, so, thank you for that.
Any other just detailed questions before we talk about discussion on either further decreasing expenditures or increasing revenue? Just clarifying questions?
I just want to run the numbers really quickly. If we did those both in 2 years, what would we end up on the reserve? We'd end up in the reserve in and around 8.2%, correct? Yeah, we would, if we did 2 years on ECLC, and if we implemented the changes on nutrition, we'd end up over a percentage point higher.
The fiscal impact over tuition for 2 years versus 3 years is an increase in about $50,000 of revenue next year, and about another $60,000 over 105. So, to me, my recommendation is to stick with the 5% over 3 years, for the increased tuition. However, what I would say is as the base, increase it over 5 years, and then investigate in that sliding scale of keeping like a standard level of tuition, and then, as parents.
But would we wait until after the third year to implement?
We could start looking at it next year. Yeah. And potentially implement it for the 2024 budget.
For income?
Mm-hmm, correct. The other thing that I want to point out to the board is we supplement in lower class sizes already at all of our elementary schools and across the district. So I feel like if we say we're going to balance the budget and have ECLC be self-sustaining, all of our schools should be self-sustaining. So we already have a huge amount of our staff paid by general fund, local taxes. So if we're gonna do self-sustaining there, I think that needs to be something that we do at all schools, which would mean drastically increasing class size across the district.
Well, the reason why I disagree with that is because we have a series of, we're actually substantially below the average of the market rate for everything else compared to ECLC. $100. So it's not just that I don't mind a subsidy if we're at market rate, but we're dramatically below market
I
rate.
think once we increase over it's 15% over 3 years. I think once we get there, we are within the ballpark and
Yeah,
within.
but you just said as we do that, we should increase class size.
I was saying, if we decide that we want that program to be self-sustaining, we also then need to look at how do we gradually make all of our programs at every level only funded or only staffed with what we earn on QBE.
No, again, I don't agree with that, largely because I'm willing to continue to subsidize ECLC for the students that need that subsidy and expanding the program, which is effectively what we're doing in the regular class size. Or in our regular classes, we're actually ensuring that we're providing that high level of quality instruction for all students, including the ones that aren't able to afford whatever the millage rate would have to be to maintain where we are. What is happening in ECLC right now, though, is that we are actually limited in the number of underprivileged kids that we can serve because we are paying $2,500 per child that might be affluent. And that's where I'm just fundamentally uncomfortable, is that.
Yeah, and I agree, there needs to be some changes, but I think doing that change over time over 3 years versus 2, makes a little more sense for the community, for the families, at this time. So I would just recommend, and that we keep looking at it. So it's not that once we do the 15%, we're done. We've got a plan, it's been vetted by that team, they put a lot of time in it. I think at this point, keeping it at 5% over 3 years is the starting point, and then continue the discussions as a board on what we want that to look like over time.
I would like to see it at 7.5% over 2 years and us bring in 6 or 8 kids as opposed to 3. That's possible. I'd rather, let's put our money where our mouth is. If our value is actually supporting the additional kids instead of it being 3. How many is needed? What is the need? It's probably a lot more than 3, right?
Well, let's talk to Doug. Right now, it's not so much that the students aren't getting the daycare, it's that, and that's why we've done 6 at Fraser and 3 at College Heights. Because most of the families that live here you can't transport students in a bus from this area over there. So the parents can't get them there, they don't want to take them. So that's why we've allocated those 6 spaces. So it is 9 spaces we've added, 3 at College Heights and 6 at Fraser Center. And that is what we anticipated kind of in our gradual plan.
There will be 9 slots
Mm-hmm.
over the 3 years.
Correct. Well, 9 spots next year, and we can look at adding more the following year.
Okay. Now, if we did, 7.5% increase, what would that look like in terms of those spaces?
They wouldn't change.
Okay.
So just let me add that, because Dr. Furman didn't fill a lot of vacant positions, I do anticipate our ending fund balance to be higher.
Yeah, I mean, I know I'm harping on fund balance, but it's not really fund balance that I'm worried about. It is the flexibility to serve the other aspects of the community. I mean, fundamentally, that reserve is there to allow us the flexibility to make decisions, like bringing in more kids over, to bring more kids over into the Fraser Center or into, for example. It's not, I don't have in my head that we have to hit a certain fund balance number. Again, just coming at it from a value standpoint.
So with what are your thoughts about knowing that there are 9 slots that will be funded?
Well, so could it be 12? Right? Again, what we're saying is that we are actually asking our seniors, people on fixed income, people who aren't actually, people that are already struggling to afford to live in Decatur, we are asking them to take on roughly an 8% tax increase this year to continue to fund potentially affluent parents in a program that is limited because federal funding just got cut. And I'm just uncomfortable with that balance, right? I'm 100% behind figuring out a sliding scale, because not everybody can just move to whatever the Suzuki program is. I get that. I'm comfortable with that, but there's definitely parents taking advantage of what we're offering in ECLC that would not be impacted by moving us up to the market number, because we are dramatically below that.
I think the ECLC is the number of spots / Fraser that are available for far more. Better, because ultimately it's serving a housing authority and a community where sometimes there may be 12 kids, some years there may be 6, some years there may be 3, they just don't know. And to be in a position through community funding or from us, and I've been told by Doug before, it's like, oh yeah, we're not using nearly enough of those spots right now. It's not a need-based thing for us. We just don't have the kids that are that age right now. That population may age out. We may have an explosion, right? They may have families move in with a ton of 2-year-olds, and all of a sudden, 9 would be embarrassing. Like, maybe, I don't know. I'm not familiar enough with the demographics and the age out and that sort of stuff. I would love as a school board to say, well, you got 18 new 3-year-olds? Come on. We got a spot for them as a Fraser and as a community. If we don't, we will raise the money and we will make it happen. We will hire the teachers, educate them. Not just as a school board, but you know what I mean.
So, but kind of moving forward, you know,
I think 9 is fine, and I think that we should reach out, and if 9 isn't fine, we should be dynamic enough to respond.
what about 5% over 3 years versus?
I think, I mean, when the community has put so much effort into it, I think 5 with a plan, knowing people that it will go up. I mean, 5 is basically telling people, when I ran, hold on, I just wrote the numbers down. So right now, if you're a newborn to an infant, and you're taking advantage of aftercare, you're spending $1,377 plus $258, so you're right at $1,600. We're asking them, you know, next year to spend an extra $300 a month to take advantage of those services, the 5% increase, versus an extra $420 roughly. You know, letting them know, letting them plan, letting them come through it. I would much prefer the 5% over 3 years, because it is just $50,000.
I like the 5% of the years. I also like the scale. Also, potentially increasing it to that 7.5% for new families coming in. So that we're not affecting necessarily the sticker shock for parents that will be in school. There won't be sticker shock for the new ones that are. There's a way we can, and I don't know if that makes it more difficult, but if there's a way to at least look at that and the sliding scale and start it a little bit higher for the newcomers, I think would be an option. I think, yeah, but I think 5% over 3 years, especially hearing Andy's presentation, be a better route to go. Staying with that route, thought was the slots, right? So, you know, I would like to see what does that 9 number do for this year, for this next year that we're talking about. Does that number feel right? Does that feel good? Is that what's needed? And if we did go from 5% to 7.5%, does that number increase? If it doesn't, you know, I do want to make sure that the underlying or the overarching reason why we're doing this is so that we can continue to serve the underprivileged, which was the goal of this school. So I want that to be the forefront. And if it's not equally aligned and it's not going to increase that number, then I think we need to be really careful with what we're doing there. Been in conversations with Doug. He's kind of that's where we came up with the 9. The 9? Okay, so we're serving the 9 that that community has expressed the need. So, then I think that we're exactly where we need to be then.
and then continuing to look at it every year.
I can be comfortable with the 5% if we're pretty aggressive on the sliding scale going forward, so that I just think about where my family is, and if I was taking advantage of this, I'm just underpaying into the system. And I am, even if it's not for the 9, I'm depriving you of resources somewhere else by not paying market rate. And that, I am uncomfortable with that, right? And so if we're capable of quickly getting that sliding scale into place, and then quickly ensuring the top of that sliding scale is paying full tuition, then I'm comfortable with it.
I like Tasha's suggestion, you know, I really appreciate his presentation and the reminder of why, you know, that program was started in the first place. And so that helped to center this conversation for me. And so, it's good to know that, you know, 9 was informed by, EHA. And I like Tasha's suggestion in terms of starting at, you know, the higher end of sliding scale for newcomers, who fall within that income bracket, whatever that is.
Okay. So school nutrition, how are we with the increase of 50 cents for next year, for that? I think that makes a big dent in that. You know, I think next year's gonna be a very telling year for the school nutrition program, coming off of free meals for everyone, introducing some additional revenue sources with the premium meals and a la carte. So I'd like to really see what happens next year when we revert back to normal operating procedures for school lunch. I think jagging up the price too much too soon, we will actually shoot ourselves in the foot by and less revenue. And we have a large staff on hand, and then we technically would have to look at some riffing with our school nutrition staff, which we don't want to do.
I'm in agreement with the 50 cents.
Do we have any, brainstorming around getting more participation?
How does our participation look compared to others? Is it lower, is it average? Just curious if there's ways that we can increase. Some kind of campaign or, you know, just wondering, and you may not know that number off, you know, those statistics off your head, but I am wondering if there's a way we can increase participation and where we fall in line with other schools as far as participation.
I will have to research what other participation for us is, make it more appealing. It's actually really choosing to eat with us. Even, adult-wise, which is not our main source, but it does matter. We used to have salad bars, so we got rid of a lot of things because we were trying to, you know, break down things, trying to bring back some more of those kinds of things. Even if it's not a bar, but, like, we wanted to bring salad back, so that also plays a part, trying to increase the variety.
Let me ask if I can, and if we're talking about typical meals in the standard menu now going up 50%, or, I'm sorry, 50 cents each year, I'm okay with that. What I get a little bit nervous about is if we're gonna hold the prices the same as we start experimenting with potentially more expensive food, then we actually are then we're actually having to increase the subsidy. Are we able to talk about, you mentioned premium pricing and things of that nature. If we are gonna be expanding the menu and we do introduce something like premium pricing, let's make sure we're actually pricing that at a break-even cost and not at some sort of subsidized cost. Let's make sure that that is actually coming into the schools priced in a way that means we can continue to provide that.
We will, and actually, our a la carte menu is priced like
Things
that.
like that already, yeah, it's great.
I used to be one of those teachers that ate regularly and kind of sit down. And like I said, they used to make like a squash casserole, so beans, the greens and cornbread, it was absolutely delicious.
Yeah,
And I was so excited. So, yeah, so, I understand in terms of the whole scratch menu thing, because I was, supportive of that wholeheartedly. So, but I'm, in favor, Hans brings up a great point again in terms of, and I would assume that that's what you do anyway, when you look at create your menus, that you know, not gonna create this a la carte menu that's, you know, phenomenal, but we, you know, it's gonna cost us to lose money. So knowing that you will be looking at that, I think I'm cool with the 50 cent, increase.
Yeah, 50 sounds great. The only other, 17, 18, do we know how much the increase was then? That was a question.
25 an hour.
Quarter, okay. That seems totally reasonable. And maybe watching what COB does if their approval goes in. If it's wholly rejected for some reason, maybe letting us know why or what that feedback was would be interesting. And then, I wrote down from an interesting question, how do you deal with when you put a menu item up there, at least in my household, people I know, some are incredibly popular meals, and then some are very unpopular? How does the
So
nutrition staff
eventually,
deal?
we would take them off. When I first came, we were focusing on breakfast, because
Yeah.
our participation in breakfast.
Yeah.
So we did do a customer survey that spring, but we didn't get to roll breakfast out the way we intended.
Okay.
But what our plan was to do was to only put the favorites on the menu. And so that is kind of where we want to be. We want it to be where at least 70% of our menu items are the items that the kids are absolutely in love with and stay away from. So that's just getting feedback from our students.
The ones you put on the menu that our kids are actually buying,
Correct.
you
Like,
keep
this is their
revisiting.
favorite, this is what we're serving.
Gotcha, because my daughter's refused to buy the fish sandwich. I really want to try it. We fight about it every month.
Fish sandwich is not that popular, but, you know.
You know, I'm gonna come in and buy a fish sandwich one day.
Pay the
And I'll come up and give, at the adult price, and I'll email you my feedback.
I'm not gonna take the fish sandwich off, just because we have a lot of, students that actually want fish or vegetarian. So I have to eat something.
Okay, thank you for entertaining.
There was one last point, if I can. I'm happy with the 50 cent this year, but I don't want us to lock in whether it's gonna be 50 cents next year, just because we don't know what's gonna happen with inflation, and like, so we may need to be flexible on going higher.
And you did
I agree
mention
with
that that's
that.
something
Yeah.
that changes every year anyway, so yeah, I think changing that every year based on what you're seeing probably makes more sense. Is Dr. Carmen on?
She is, I texted her, she agrees with the 3-year. She is on board with that. She hasn't said anything about the, let me know. Okay, so the other, yeah, I feel like we have cut across the budget in places to, bring the budget in line with what I think is a recommended fund balance and prioritizing what we need to as a district. So unless the board wants to entertain a mill rate increase, we will present the finalized numbers at the April board meeting for.
Where is, yeah. So the only change will really be food nutrition. It's only 3.5%.
That'll be,
It will,
you
yeah.
know, 0.75% increase on the fund balance, so this is good.
All right, the last item for the agenda this evening is, working with GSBA on several priorities for the board, strategic planning, policy review, and then reviewing and updating our norms. So I've prepared kind of an overview of what the phases might look like, as I've been talking with GSBA on this planning process. So it's kind of a calendar for the end of this year and rolling up into next year of what that would look like over time. So just so the board can kind of see where we will be in that strategic planning and development. I also shared with the board the introduction and some information from this book. A lot of great governance ideas and how, as a board, that we can really focus on policies as a governance team, because I believe, and this book really reinforces, when we write really strong reform policies that guide the work of the district, that we can impact change district-wide to really have that, really focusing on those key priorities of equity, increasing student achievement. So, if the board's amenable to this, I wanted you to read those, kind of the little snapshot of that, and then we'll talk about it at the April board meeting if you would like. We'll go ahead and order books for everyone and do a book study. This also book really will help us with policy review and reform. What this book does is really helps you understand the difference between kind of your routine operating policies, which is about 90% of the board policy, versus reform policies, which are big policies. And I gave you 2 drafts, so, these are from Henry County. So the first one is their like criminal background check. This is an example of your standard operating procedure policies. Like, we have to have a policy on standard operating procedures, one of them being criminal background checks. So when I start working with Angela from GSBA on policy updates and reviews, like 90% of the policy is gonna be, hey, what does the state say we have to do? Let's implement what works for City Schools of Decatur, put that in the works, attach any accompanying procedures that need to go along with this. The big work will be this other example, which I would call reform policies, which are, and this one really talks about how the board really ensures high-quality education in a school system. So this is where the board will really lean in and really do a lot of heavy lifting on these huge policies, because this is what the governance team should be doing, particularly if we want to build an anti-racist school system. And I think that's done by writing policies that are implementing anti-racist beliefs and practices. So that's my recommendation for the policy review and the strategic planning. So unless the board has any questions about that, the book study will really feed into as well, as we get through the strategic planning, identifying core beliefs, student outcomes, what we want those to look like as a governance team, and then it will also inform what are those reform policies that we want to write as a board. So that's my recommendation for those 2, in collaboration with GSBA. And then the last one is setting the dates to review and update norms. When I spoke with GSBA about that, they want to set up a 3-hour session with the board to jump in and really dig deeply into the norms. That's their recommendation. But if that's something the board wants to kind of take in chunks, we can do that as well. So I just wanted to hear from the board what you guys were thinking on how quickly do we want to lift the norm process and review and updates. Do we want to invest a 3-hour session? Do we want to kind of go a little slower on that?
I'm cool with the 3 hours. I mean, you know, 1 hour, I mean, it can go by so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And anticipate robust conversations, and so, that's gonna be a lot of work, I think.
I feel like 3 hours is light. I think it's like a couple.
Well, that's the first one, and then after the 3-hour session, it would be okay. He'll chunk out the rest of the work to do it, because some of it will be homework for the board, reviewing things, drafting some norms together as a team, and then reviewing those together. I think too, want to make sure that we've given Carmen enough time to, get her life organized with her new family members. So kind of pushing this out a little bit until she's ready to say, okay, I think in person is really necessary for that.
There's a fair bit of pre-work that we can do, like,
Correct.
I know we asked to get examples of other policies and, like, not policies, I'm sorry. Well, also policies, but we asked to get examples of board norms and things and systems that were really functional. A lot of that, I think we can be doing ahead of time, right? That would inform that 3 hours.
Right, and that's exactly what Sam said. Yeah.
I have a question, and I don't know if you all feel one way or the other about this. I remember, when I first came to the district, they were doing a book study. And I will probably have a different appreciation about it now sitting in this seat, but it's a bit excruciating sitting there listening to them discuss a book that no one else was reading. I was just wondering.
We would do it more like in like a work, we
Oh,
would
okay.
do work session kind of discussions, we could do an online discussion.
Okay.
And really picking out points of the book when we get to crucial pieces in the policy development and strategic planning.
I'm comfortable with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, just it's really gonna serve as an anchor for common knowledge for the governance team.
Good idea.
same language and framework.
You got it, exactly. Yeah, we would not have a 2-hour discussion book study. I don't think I have the tolerance for that either. Oh, she says this sounds good. Okay, all right. All we have for the agenda this evening.
Before we go, I just want to take a half a second. One, I want to thank the entire team for the work that was done today. It's great. I in particular want to call out, all right, I know how hard a budget is. I know how much of a monster it is to prepare, and this was a hard budget year. So you did a great job. This was fantastic, and I think we're in a great place for it. Thank you, Dr. Furman. Thank you, everybody.
I give her pats on the back all the time. She is great. Okay, well, that's it. We're gonna adjourn our meeting.
Meeting adjourned at 8:08.
You missed me.
Man. Best part being a chair.